is, well, first let me ask you guys, did you hear me okay on the recording on Thursday?
Yeah.
Okay, that's because basically this is how I was recording. I was sitting right here and talking to the laptop. Okay, whenever I come over here and walk around things, that the quality gets worse because this is where the recorder is. So, I'll try to kind of hover about a little bit, but also be close enough. All right, so we're talking about imperialism. Continuing that whole discussion. And before we begin, I did want to point out something to you. The idea I have, more or less, is on Thursday to review with you guys and Friday take a test. That's mostly what I'm thinking of doing. It sort of depends on what we get through, to be perfectly honest. I may actually just push the test back to next week and kind of work on something else this week. I don't know yet. I'm trying to figure it out. What's that? When is CUNA? Of course it is.
Thursday is that woman's league.
All right, then definitively, then the test is Friday. There's no way I can push it back. So expect essays online by the end of the day today. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. That's my purpose. So let's get through it then, shall we? This section, you'll notice, in the rest of this chapter, there's very, very little writing. This is by design. I want to show you guys what to expect for later classes. We talk about like honors or even regular U.S. history, and especially in some of the more senior courses, this is what notes look like, more or less. So we're going to do a lot of explaining what goes into this. There's literally 2 slides. That's it. Covers the whole section. So my plan is to cover section 3 and 4 today. That puts us covering the Middle East and India. Okay? So there's a few concepts I want to hit on. I'm going to kind of work through them today. So for starters, let's talk about the what's. Geopolitics. Geopolitics are pretty simply political interactions of the world, as opposed to political interactions within one country. Okay, imperialism makes it incredibly important to keep in mind the politics of various regions. For instance, we have to worry about other empires within Europe because they stretch across the entire world. France's empire, Britain's empire, America's empire. The interaction between all these different empires, there's a lot of political maneuvering that goes on. You guys remember when we talked about the balance of power and how that was of incredible importance during the Napoleonic Wars, and especially after the Napoleonic Wars and the peace treaties that followed. This idea that we want to keep more or less every European power balanced against each other. So this means that if one European power is starting to get a little too much military, too much of an empire, whatever, we'll see its allies start to shift away from it to its enemies and try to balance that out, balance the scales. We also worry about colonies and how to rule a colony. You might recall we talked about the 2 different methods of ruling a colony. You guys remember what they were?
Indirect British method and direct French method.
Correct. The indirect and direct methods. Okay, let's talk indirect for a second. How did the British rule their colonies? What does indirect mean? Let me give you an easier question then. What does direct mean? What's direct rule? Yeah. Plain and simple. We're going to control everything. You follow us now. You're part of our empire. You do what we say. So indirect would be, what do you think? They govern themselves, but we kind of allow them to do this. Okay? So I'm going to let you rule yourself, but you're going to have to work for me. Now, here's the thing is, one of the important concepts of empire is divide and conquer. Understand, each of these different colonies, these countries that Europe's going to take over, are going to be made up of different ethnic groups vying for each other for natural resources. And so what happens is the British will support one of these groups that'll let them rule the country. And they'll do that until that group maybe gets a little too powerful for the British to control easily. So then the British will stop siding with them and will side with a different group. So as long as this group that continues to work with the British and doesn't put too much of a fuss, they get to stay in power. If they resist, the British will find some other ethnic group to support to keep them off balance. Again, if I have these different tribes fighting each other, they're not going to rise up in revolution against me. So that's how indirect rule works. Understanding not only the politics of your fellow Europeans, but the politics within your colonies is of incredible importance. There's going to be a few instances of geopolitics that really influenced the 19th century. The Crimean War is one of the principal ones. The Crimean War is going to be, as we've already talked about, a war between Russia and who? Who else is involved? Any guesses?
Korea.
Yes. Not Korea. Britain, France, Russia. Germany doesn't exist yet. The Ottoman Empire. What happened was the Russians wanted a territory in the Crimean Peninsula, specifically the port area of Sevastopol, more to it as well. And they went to war with the Ottomans to try to take it from them. Okay? Now, this made the rest of Europe very, very nervous because the Ottoman state, while not very strong at this point, was a nice buffer to have between Russia and the rest of Europe. If that vanished, which is exactly what the Russians had in mind, it was going to lead to a much more powerful Russia and a Russia that was next door neighbors to all these other European powers. So they really didn't want that, again, balance of power. So they set out to side with the Ottomans to fight against the Russians. The Russians lost. Okay? Now, nevertheless, the Ottomans had to give up some territory, including Greece. So a lot of these territories that the Ottomans lost started to break apart the Ottoman Empire. Now that was incredibly important because one of the things we have to understand about nationalism is it continues to break these empires apart. You know, it sounds good on one hand, and hey, we want self-determination, right? Everybody should have the right to determine what country that they're going to belong to, what laws they have to follow. Yes, that sounds good, right? That's freedom, isn't it? But what's the problem with this? Let's talk about a hypothetical situation. I don't know if you guys have followed any of the Texas politicians, but there's been a few that said we need to secede from the Union. We need to form a new Republic of Texas, a new country, not be part of the U.S. anymore. Can they do that? Legally, can you secede from the Union? Ask the American South. The answer is no. Kind of fought a war over that. Decided that no, you can't secede from the Union. Once you're a member, always a member. It's like no backseats. So let's say hypothetically they did. They became their own nation. Okay, how would this affect the United States, do you think? Texas just up and left. Let's talk taxes for a second. Okay, every state pays taxes to the federal government. Yes. What's it? Don't jump ahead. Let's follow this step by step. Okay. Okay. They do. Yes. Okay. Understand this. So, what do they get in exchange for their taxes? What does the federal government give the states in exchange for the tax money? Well, help for schools, yeah, sure. Roads. Anything else? What if Mexico invaded Texas?
Security?
Yeah, military aid. giant federal army that would come and, excuse me, Mr. Mexico, would you get on the Texas, please? Actually, we kind of did that whenever it was still part of Mexico, but neither here nor there. You know, the army, military protection. You know, if Texas seceded from the Union, all that tax money that they're giving the federal government would disappear. Okay, they're not paying taxes into the federal government anymore because they're not part of the U.S. Now, what would the effects of that be? Consider this. Not all states are equal in terms of the amount of value they get from the government in exchange for tax money. Basically put, every state gets equal amount of money for schools, for military spending, all those different types of things. More or less. It's actually oversimplifying. Anyways, you get me this. What happens is, if everybody's equal, well, certain states are going to be paying more in tax money than a bigger population. So Texas, which has a huge population, is going to be paying a lot more money in taxes than they're actually getting back from the government. So that actually, they could save some money by forming their own country. Except for the fact that everything they have that's federal has to go back to the United States. So no nukes for them, no military planes or trains or automobiles or anything. They have to give up everything that's part of the federal government. So it's going to hurt them and it's going to hurt us kind of badly if they do that. All right? Now imagine that's what's happening to our country. Well, it's not just Texas. It's Texas, California, New York, Washington, Kentucky. Everybody's forming their own country. What happens to the power that was the United States of America? Can we go and influence geopolitics around the world? We've become infinitely weaker because of our division. Think about the state or the national model. E pluribus unum. From many, one. So, this is what happens to the Ottoman Empire. It fragments, it starts breaking apart. And it has to do with the Crimean War, largely. The next, it's not really kind of a war, but kind of an important thing nonetheless, is the Suez Canal. You guys know where the Suez Canal is? It's in Africa. It connects the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. Consider this. The whole purpose of the canal is to shorten how long it takes to travel. Okay? So consider this. There's still a lot of trade that's going to happen between Europe and Asia. So China, India, Middle East. Okay? They can go here. Or they can come there. How much mileage does this save by going this way? About 1,300 miles. Basically all of Africa. Or something like 4 months travel time, cut in half. Not too shabby.
It connects the Red Sea and what?
The Mediterranean. Now here's the deal with that. Britain didn't actually own the land. They just kind of did it. And in truth, they didn't start it. It was originally started by the French. It was taken over by the Egyptians who couldn't afford it, and so went to the British. And the reason was twofold. One, merchant fleets. If you can control the canal, everyone's going to want to use it, because why would you go an extra 4 months? That's just money lost. Even though it costs money to go through the canal, it's still a lot cheaper than spending all that time going around Africa. So you're going to make a ton of cash from people just going through it. Secondly, if you rely on naval power to administer your colonies, which the British absolutely did, it's a much quicker route to get around the sea to control. You need to move your military ships really quickly. So this was important for two reasons. So the Suez Canal is going to be incredibly important later on. Lastly, the Great Game. The Great Game was a proxy war that was fought between Great Britain and Russia over oil in the Middle East. Does that sound familiar at all to you? It does to me. What do I mean by proxy war? Let me explain. Let's say we have a country. This country's name is Squaretopia. just so happens that there's two ethnic groups in Squaretopia. Ethnic group A and ethnic group B. Ethnic group A likes bagels. They think it's just the beans. However, they think donuts are the devil's food. Down to donuts. Okay? So they hate anybody who eats donuts. Ethnic group B loves them some donuts. They think that donuts are just amazing. Bagels, on the other hand, are oppressive and cruel. And frankly, they think anybody who eats bagels would just be better off dead. Whoa, that escalated quickly. So what do I mean by a proxy war? Well, let's say that we have Great Britain on this side, and we have Russia on this side, right? So they both are interested in the principal export of Squaretopia, which strangely happens to be chessboards. They're just into that, I guess. They both want to be able to control this country. And in fact, they are going to fight a war between each other, but it's not going to be overt. It's not going to be a hot war. We're not going to have Russian soldiers killing British soldiers on open ground. Instead, what happens is Britain approaches ethnic group A and says, yeah, we totally agree with you. Here's a bunch of weapons and money, and all we want in exchange whenever you take over Squaretopia is we want to have, trade concessions. We want you to give us preferential treatment, sell us your chessboards at a low price, and we'll just kind of work out the details later. And so ethnic group A is like, sweet! So they're getting all these advanced weapons that the B side doesn't have, so they're going to start really just tearing down the deal. Russia, yeah, you can probably see where this is going. They end up backing side B and offering them more or less the same offer. So group A and B are getting more advanced weapons and military training and military advisors, troops and support staff from their kind of parent countries, their sort of sponsors, so they can wage a high-stakes war against their enemy. Okay? So the whole thing gets even worse than it was before. Right, so there's really only two things that are going to happen here down the line. Option A, side A or B wins. Okay? So let's say, for instance, side A is defeating side B. Okay? They control the country now. They are an oppressive majority, which means most likely side B is going to be heavily repressed to the tune of, if you eat a donut, we'll kill you. And maybe start oppressing your culture, and maybe just decide that you're better off dead and start exterminating your entire ethnic group. Genocide. Option B. Britain and Russia decide, we're done fighting this little issue of Squaretopia, we've got bigger and better things to do, and they just leave. So all the money and funds and everything that was coming into the country dries up, and side A and B are still fighting this war, so they've got to turn to other means of producing wealth. So side A goes, you know what? Let's start producing methamphetamine, and we'll sell on the black market. They take this money, and they end up doing their work with drug money. And maybe side B is like, hey, we got a bunch of diamonds over here. We're going to start using slave labor to harness up all these diamonds, and we're going to ship this around the world, and we're going to use that money to fund our war. And the whole situation continues on for the next 150 years with nothing resolved. This has happened across the world, in Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East. Ask the question, why do we care about ISIS? Why do we care about terrorists at all? Is it because they kill lots and lots of Americans? Put some figures here. More people have died in car accidents in the past year than have died in every terrorist attack on American soil ever. So it's not just because people are dying. There's more to it than that.
It's about geopolitics. Make sense? Any questions? So that's a great game. Only, in this case, it wasn't over chessboard, it was over Florida.
Selim III was the Ottoman Sultan during all this nonsense. And one of the things that happened with the Ottoman Empire is they were under a lot of pressure. Specifically, because it was a really old-fashioned institution. Selim was actually going to attempt to reform, but he ended up being shot down by the Janissaries. Selim III, it's not Janissaries for a second, actually. You guys remember what the Janissaries were? The Janissaries were slave soldiers, specifically owned by the Sultan. The idea was, if he had soldiers who were personally loyal to him and only him, that meant he could control the state a little bit better than the traditional Turkish method of relying upon personal magnetism to attract the loyalty of the Ottoman nobles, the beys. The problem was, over the years, the sultans gave more and more and more power to the Janissaries, starting really even earlier with Suleiman the Magnificent, that eventually they kind of basically took over the government, all in name. They more or less controlled the sultan. He tried to end this by instituting military reforms. If he could create a modern military institution, one that relied upon new techniques and new weapons, and basically an independent fighting force, that would check the power of the Janissaries. Of course, they didn't want that to happen. So they ended up resisting it, and basically he had to stop or else risk death. Muhammad Ali is going to be a guy who you guys are probably familiar with, but maybe not, because it's not the boxer. Muhammad Ali was the Turkish governor, the Pasha, in Egypt. And what happened was he caused a revolution to occur that resulted in Egypt freeing itself from the Ottoman Empire. But he does more than that, because he had to basically work on getting the Ottoman dependence, I would say, their economic security. They had to organize that. And basically what he did is he did that with cotton. Have you guys ever heard of Egyptian cotton? What's nice about Egyptian cotton? It's soft, right? It's so nice. He made Egypt the premier cotton producer of the world. Cotton was where some money was at. He was able to make Egypt modernize and become a very powerful state. That being said, it was not able to overthrow European powers, obviously. It made them kind of more independent, and the Europeans kind of had to treat them a little bit more than what they say did in the Congo. Yeah.
We call it the revolution.
Yeah. Specifically among the Mamluks, but that's, you don't need to know that, it's not worried. But yeah, we ended up freeing Egypt, so to speak, and creating some things. Nasser al-Din was, he was the Persian Shah, trying to get the term, basically king. Nasser al-Din ended up basically giving concessions to the Europeans, specifically for the tobacco trade. Tobacco was something that was wildly used throughout the Middle East. I'm sure you guys have probably heard of a hookah. A hookah is a type of pipe. It's like Alice in Wonderland, the caterpillar smoking one, I guess. And it's a jug of water with a hose coming out of it, and it's a pipe. It's like, we think of a pipe going like this and some holding onto it. It's the same basic concept. The only difference is that the smoke is filtered through the water first. The idea behind this was supposedly it was healthier, which it's not, not really. This is what people said, things like that. And the thing is people smoke this all over the Middle East, and even in India. It's actually, the term changes from place to place. Hookah is actually a variation of the, I believe it's the Arab world. Arab word is Hanukkah. But the original name for it was in Nargil, which I think it was different. Not here. So what happened was that it was a very lucrative trade good. It was traded all throughout the world, and especially there was a lot of people who smoked a lot throughout the Middle East. The idea was the Europeans wanted to basically budget on that, control the tobacco growing trade in Persia. And basically Nasser al-Din granted that because of a lot of pressure coming from the Europeans. Well, this formed a popular revolution against him, and basically he ended up rescinding this to the Europeans and began this whole problem with Europe. Eventually that's going to blow up into oil. So we live in a great game, the oil trade, which basically starts a long process of folks in Persia not liking Europeans. Now, if you look today, do you guys know what country Persia is? Which one? Iran. You know how great Iran gets along with us, yeah? They're besties. Not. And that's why. It goes back to Nasser al-Din. Okay, that's it for that section. Let's move on to the next, shall we? Whee! Don't you guys just love talking about politics from hundreds of years ago? How about no? Today is a good day. We get to talk about stuff. You don't have to play volleyball. This is a good day. Why are you worried about it? Better than school.
No, well, I woke up because you have to wake up early for tournaments, so I woke up for the volleyball.
We had to do that once for archery. It was a terrible, terrible thing. Everyone had to wake up at 6. This is why archery is great, because you usually have to, you don't have to be there till 1. Isn't that nice? I thought so. We don't know what this is. We don't know what he's talking about. Let's talk stuff. What do you guys know about Hinduism? It is a religion. Well done.
What else? God, like looks like an elephant.
Well, one of their gods, which tells you they are polytheistic. Hey, yes indeed. Nice. What else? Reincarnation. Huzzah! We know other things. We know what happens when people die. Great. This is a good starting point, because I know there's a lot of terms that have to do with Hinduism you're probably familiar with, but don't know what they mean. For instance, Nirvana. Never heard of Nirvana? Fantastic. They're a band out of Seattle. No, other things as well. You guys have heard of karma? Karma. What about Dharma? Any Lost fans out there? Dharma Initiative. Oh yeah. Let's talk about what all this means. All right. So what do Hindus believe? Okay. First, understand this is a very, very, very quick explanation of some kind of complex theology, but that's okay. First, they believe that life is hell. Literally. Their idea of hell is what you're experiencing right now. Okay? So what happens when you die? You have to go through it again, and again, and again, and again, and again for eternity. So you're basically stuck in hell. Kind of. You see, the idea is you can get out of this. Okay? You can achieve a oneness with all creation, sort of like paradise, but not exactly. It's kind of, the explanation of it's a little fuzzy. The term actually means to snuff out like a candle. Like you blow it out and you just cease to be. But it's not like you cease to be, rather, like I said, it's complicated. But basically the idea of paradise, understand that. That is nirvana. Okay? So you're reincarnated unless you can get to nirvana. Make sense? How do you get this fantastic deal? How do you get to nirvana?
iTunes.
By accumulating iTunes, that's right. Except you have to buy a new version of it every week or so because it's made by Apple. So, really so the way you do this is by fitting into your role in society. You probably have heard that India has a caste system, yes? Or at least did at one point. You guys know what a caste system is? Okay. Basically, you are born into a social group. There's a social hierarchy. You cannot move out of this social group. You are born into it, you will die into it, okay? You cannot marry anyone outside of your caste, okay? You must do whatever your caste dictates. Now, caste is culture, but also means job. So, like, for instance, this is your job. This is what you will do, and you will do this and nothing else. Now, if you are a good little person and you do your job, you fit into your culture, you do everything you're supposed to do, you accumulate sort of spiritual credit called karma. Basically, little points that if you accumulate enough points, then you will reincarnate at the next higher caste. And at the next higher caste, you have more responsibilities. Basically, your position in life will be better. You'll be wealthier, you'll be more powerful, you'll have all these things, and so, of course, you should be able to do more good and get into more things. You kind of work your way up until eventually you are no more reincarnated, you reach nirvana. Okay? That social credit is called karma. Okay? So, you reach nirvana by accumulating karma by doing your dharma. Dharma is your role in society. Make sense? Great. Glad everyone's with me. So why does this matter? India has mostly Hindus in it. There's also a good chunk of Muslims over here in the northwest, but we'll get to them later. Under the Raj, which was the British control of India, basically the era of Indian history where Britain was in charge, there was going to be a lot of cultural fighting between the Hindus and the Christians. Specifically, the British had this kind of attitude of, well, a lot of Hindu customs need to go. Not all of them, but some ones they disagreed with. For instance, the sati and the purdah. The purdah is basically women being covered up. You guys have probably seen on CNN or the news or something like that, women were basically got like, did you see that? That's it? A hijab in the Middle East? Just know maybe so? Okay. It's not just the Middle East they do that, also India. Okay, that's called the purdah. They weren't going to allow that anymore. That's illegal. Another thing that they were going to get rid of is the sati. This was a tradition where when a man died, his wife would commit suicide by burning herself to death on his funeral pyre.
Wait, which one
That's the sati, would be the burning yourself to death. For love, man. Isn't that so romantic? You know, it's actually crazy, but you know, hey. I mean, not that I'm saying you should judge other cultures, but you know, I think that's kind of fair to say that wasn't very productive, so that's not good. So that was both outlawed. And what's going to happen is there's going to be a revolt, specifically amongst the Sepoys. You guys know what the Sepoys were? We talked about them a while ago. Sepoys were Hindu soldiers that were fighting for the British. They were basically British soldiers but were Hindu. Okay? So when all these customs are starting to be outlawed, they revolt and start a war with the British. When this happens, the British clamp down on the Sepoys, crush the rebellion, and end up tightening their control over India and enforcing yet more concessions on them. For instance, Hindus become second-class citizens in their own country. This is going to be one of the main things that Mohandas Gandhi fights against whenever he ends up getting India freed from British control. Here's a few wins to consider.
Now, I told you guys we were going to talk about the Muslims. Well, politically speaking, the Muslims and the Hindus didn't get along rather well. And whenever India frees itself from British control, it was actually much larger than it was today. The Muslims in the Northwest end up forming their own country in 1906. That's later. Excuse me. They formed their own political party in 1906. I think it's like 1911, 1915 or something. But they ended up forming their own country, which is Pakistan. And to this day, there's this area of Kashmir, which both Pakistan and India claim as their own, and has basically resulted in a lot of tension there. That area is known for violence between Muslims and Hindus, and it's going to lead to a lot of problems, as you could imagine. And again, it goes back into this whole, what is the geopolitical circumstances? Well, today, Pakistan and all the other stans sort of are these Muslim areas, and what are areas controlled by Hindus or Christians, or were once controlled by Hindus or Christians, and kind of form their own territory. By the way, you guys know what the word stan, the suffix means? It means land of. So Afghanistan is the land of the Afghans. Kyrgyzstan, the land of the Kyrgyz, etc., etc. So politically speaking, how does Britain and India interact? Well, India is going to influence Britain, and Britain is going to influence India quite a bit. English common law becomes the law of the land. In India, the traditional system gets kind of shut down a little bit. However, it doesn't disappear. Even today, if you look at India as a modern entity, the cities tend to be a lot more like Western cities, whereas if you go into the countryside, it becomes a lot more Eastern, a lot more, frankly, Indian. Yeah.
What did you say the sepoys were?
They were Hindu soldiers. Specifically, they fought for the English. I'll show you a picture of them here in jail. But the Sepoy uprisings, which occurred here in 1857, was a revolution of the Sepoys against the British. Great example is, have you guys ever seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom? All right, you know at the very end of the movie where they're over the alligator pit, like kind of thing, and they're hanging on the bridge, and those British soldiers just kind of show up out of nowhere? Those are Sepoys.
So this is going way back, explaining all this different stuff we just talked about. Again, this is kind of more or less like what the notes I would write would look like. This not so much, because I didn't really talk too much about this. This is going back to the 1600s, where Britain's East India Trading Company gained trade concessions from the Mughal dynasty, and then from there continued to pass laws in order to exploit India. The thing that really kind of sparked the revolt wasn't even just trying to ban some Hindu customs, but specifically trying to convert Hindus to Christianity, which is seen as an attack on their religion and their culture, more so than anything else. That's the thing with Indian culture, is that it's even Hindus, or rather, even Indians who aren't Hindu will sometimes practice some of these cultural elements. Now, one thing that Britain does do is begins to modernize India at this point. It makes it their crown jewel of the colony. Specifically, there was something going on in the Americas during the same era. Do you guys know what was going on there? In the middle part of the 19th century, what was happening in the United States? We were fighting a war. Who? Ourselves! Because, that's what we do. And here's the thing is, Britain's main export was textiles. Okay? You guys know who they bought their cotton from? The United States. Good guess. It's the U.S. The American South, specifically. So when the Civil War went on, the American North basically blockaded the South and didn't let any cotton get out. Okay, so Britain was starved for their supply of cotton. So they turned to one of their colonies, India. India became their principal exporter of cotton.
Now, the funny thing is, after the American Civil War, the South was like, right, we're ready to start selling you cotton again, Great Britain. They're like, we got our supply. We don't need you anymore. So basically, the American South faced an economic crisis. What are we going to produce? What are we going to do? What's going to save us? You guys know what crops saved the American South? Not tobacco. That's what you guess. Peanuts. Peanuts are amazing. Peanuts save the American South, and they're delicious because we make peanut butter out of them. Think about Reese's peanut butter cups. They save the world. No big deal. So, anyways, not really the world. Well, yes, they do. They saved all mankind because of their deliciousness. Well, they're just very, very sad individuals, aren't they? Actually, that is kind of funny because there are many cultures that hate peanut butter. They don't like it. They don't taste of it. They think it's weird, gross. Which, you kind of think it is a bit weird. We're just going to take this peanut, we're going to mash it up into goo, put it on stuff. It's like, And that being said, I've met a lot of people who have immigrated from other countries, folks from China, folks from Switzerland, Germany, and then I started trying peanut butter. I thought they were really gross at first. Then they kind of grew on me, and now I crave it. And when they went back to their various places of origin, they couldn't get it. Except occasionally you'll find it in the American section in certain grocery stores. Yes, that's a thing in many places. It's funny because you see, if you've been to an ethnic food section and you've got it's Arab cuisine. It's this big. It's a bunch of just random weirdness. Or the Latin section, which is basically 1 square foot of various knickknacks and paddywhacks. Right. American section is the same thing. It's filled with Kraft macaroni and cheese, peanut butter, maple syrup, and cornbread mix. That's it. That's what's in it. Oh, and Hershey's chocolate, because most of the world thinks it's really gross. Yeah, they think it tastes like vomit. Apparently, there's some chemical that they use in Hershey's chocolate that's rendered as one of the chemicals you find in vomit. But so what? Well, so what? Because if you think about it, vomit's just food that's just in your stomach, That'd be like saying, that cornbread right there, that's got vomit in it. Well, because, eventually it's made of food. I don't know. Whatever. I think Hershey's chocolate's delicious. I'm gonna eat all of it. I eat all of it. Whatever. Some people juggle geese. Those are Segways, by the way. I love the turbines. They're fantastic. But you also notice this dual rank of troops. This was the style of fighting that they could do at this point, using the new bolt-action rifles. Bolt-actions are pretty cool devices. They're still used throughout the hunting world today because they're superior in terms of accuracy. They are slower, obviously, but when it comes to accuracy, you can't beat it. They would line up together like this, and basically you could double your fire. Or if you saw, for instance, that battle scene we saw from Zulu, where they had 3 ranks of them, this is just kind of, again, encouraging the tactics that came from the Napoleonic era. That's going to be a problem whenever the machine gun's introduced. But these are Segways. These are kind of folks who revolt. This is another important little map. This shows the building of railroads throughout India. Now, it's kind of weird. I don't know if you can read the map at all, but it says broad gauge and narrow gauge. Do you guys know there are actually 2 different gauges or widths in terms of railroad tracks? That's because we only use one in the United States. In fact, Europe uses usually one as well. Russia's the weird ones. They settle on different measurements. Because one of the things that's kind of funny about measurement, one of the things I didn't talk to you guys about Napoleon, is he ended up introducing the metric system to the world. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the world uses metric. There's only a few countries that still use the imperial standard. Great Britain is one of them, because that was the British style of measurement. This is also where the whole idea of Napoleon being short came from, because according to French measurements at the time, he was 6'2", which is, or not 6 feet, 5'2", excuse me, so itty-bitty. Except that French inches were actually longer than British inches. He was actually 5'6", 5'7",
which was average or even above average height. So measurement's kind of a big deal whenever you're talking about train tracks, because the whole idea of the train is you can ship all across the world using them, except for the fact that if you want to go through Russia, you have to have a different size wheel on your train, or rather distance of the wheels. So what's weird is you had some trains that actually had two sets of wheels that could like pop down depending on what type of track you were going on and try to make these connections, but otherwise just they relied on one. That's why they had two different sizes. You can see that most of them are standard size. And the hunger for material throughout India led to a significant amount of railroads, and this led to building railroads all across the world. There's actually a railroad that was built also throughout Africa, and there's a famous story that came from the building of one particular bridge, because the crew of the bridge that were building were attacked by lions, man-eating lions. And specifically, I think they ended up killing something like 60 men, which was actually a huge number. Lions don't generally eat people, and they apparently developed a taste for them. And what's funny is you can actually see these lions in Chicago because what happened was eventually they were hunted down and killed. They were made into rugs by the guy who killed them, who had them in his house until he died, and then they were sold to the Field Museum in Chicago, where they were stuffed and made into like little kind of like statue type things. And they made a movie about it called The Ghosts in the Darkness. They were the man-eaters of Savo. It was a really creepy movie. I remember growing up in the 90s because it was like, it was sort of the order of Jurassic Park. You know, these lions are eating people, what have you. And it's like, and it's a true story. You're like, what? It's like, you know, dinosaurs are going to attack you. It's not true. Lions are real. It's kind of freaked everybody out. And it's kind of a neat story. All right, guys, take it easy.
And we made it through both sections. Huzzah!